What if the letter really exists? What if, hidden away in a drawer, there's a document so explosive that it could rip apart the carefully constructed image of Meghan Markle and bring Prince Harry face to face with the truth he's been trying to escape? That's the story we're about to unravel. And let me warn you right now, this isn't just about gossip or tabloid rumors. This is about loyalty, betrayal, manipulation, and the possibility that Harry himself may have finally realized he was a pawn in someone else's game. Picture the scene. A dimly lit study, papers scattered across an oak desk, the silence of midnight broken only by the sound of Harry's own breath. His hands tremble as he unfolds a letter that was never supposed to see the light of day. At first, it reads like a confession, a private message meant to stay locked in the shadows. But then the words sharpen, like daggers on paper, revealing accusations that Meghan had not only manipulated him, but had systematically pulled him away from everyone who ever mattered in his life. Imagine the weight of that discovery pressing down on him. Now ask yourself, what would you do if you found out the person you trusted most may have been scripting your downfall all along? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the outside, Harry and Meghan's story has always been painted as a fairy tale. The prince who broke tradition, the actress who charmed him, the love story that defied royal protocol and the rigid walls of Buckingham Palace. But beneath the glossy magazine covers and the carefully curated interviews, there's always been a shadow, a whisper that things weren't quite what they seemed. And this letter? It doesn't just whisper. It screams. You see, timing is everything. Right now, as the monarchy faces its own storm of scandals, declining public trust, and questions of succession, Harry's revelations have never carried more weight. A private confession today could become tomorrow's global headline. And let's be honest, the royal machine knows that one crack can lead to collapse. That's why this matters now, more than ever. This isn't about one marriage. It's about an institution, a reputation, and the future of a family that has built its power on silence and secrecy. So when Harry holds that letter in his hands, he's not just reading words. He's holding a weapon that could end Meghan's reign in his life, and perhaps her influence over the royal narrative forever. But let's take a step back. How did we get here? Think about Harry's journey. The young boy who walked behind his mother's coffin, the teenager chased by cameras, the soldier who found solace on the battlefield, and the man who swore he'd protect his wife from the same fate his mother suffered. That promise was powerful, but promises made in pain can become chains. Did Meghan recognize that pain and twist it to her advantage? Did she use Diana's memory as a key to unlock Harry's heart, only to tighten her grip once she was inside? It's a question that haunts every page of the alleged letter. And here's the contradiction that keeps gnawing at people. Harry has always been known as the rebel royal, the one who spoke his mind, the one who laughed off tradition, the one who connected with people on a human level. Yet since marrying Meghan, his independence seems to have vanished. Friends gone, family estranged, public image fractured. Isn't it ironic? The man once praised for his authenticity now reads lines that sound rehearsed, staged, almost scripted. Could that be coincidence? Or was it design? The letter suggests the latter. Now, I want you to think about manipulation for a moment. It doesn't always look like screaming matches or controlling threats. Sometimes it's subtle. A sigh, a silence, a carefully chosen phrase that makes you doubt yourself. Emotional manipulation works best when it's invisible, when the victim doesn't even realize it's happening. According to what's been claimed in that letter, Meghan perfected this art. She allegedly isolated Harry, convincing him that his family didn't understand him, that the monarchy would always betray him, that only she saw the real Harry. Can you imagine the psychological weight of believing that your blood relatives are against you, while the person by your side insists they're your only salvation? That's not love. That's a leash. And it's not just about Harry as a husband. It's about Harry as a son, a brother, and a father. By allegedly cutting him off from the royal family, Meghan didn't just claim his loyalty, she redirected his legacy. Think about it. Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet, now grow up outside the royal system, with little connection to their heritage. Was that Harry's choice? Or was it the consequence of someone else's strategy? The letter pushes us to question whether the so-called escape to California was a liberation, or a carefully orchestrated exile. Now let's touch on something that may sting a little. Meghan has often framed herself as the victim, harassed by tabloids, unsupported by the crown, misunderstood by the world. But what if that very narrative was her greatest weapon? Playing the victim can be the most powerful manipulation tactic of all. Because once people see you as fragile, every criticism looks like cruelty. Every question looks like persecution. And once Harry accepted that narrative, he wasn't just defending his wife. He was defending his own decision to stand against his family. The letter suggests Meghan understood this dynamic and used it masterfully. So here we are, standing on the edge of revelation. A letter that could end Meghan's public image as the wronged princess and recast her as the manipulator, the strategist, the architect of Harry's estrangement. But here's the real kicker. Harry revealing this letter doesn't just put Meghan in the spotlight. It puts himself on trial too. Because by admitting he was manipulated, Harry must face the painful truth that he abandoned his family not entirely by choice, but under influence. That is a devastating realization for anyone, let alone a prince whose every move has been scrutinized by the world. I want to ask you something directly. If you were Harry, would you reveal it? Would you risk destroying your marriage to reclaim your family? Or would you stay silent, protecting the person you love, even if they've hurt you? It's a question with no easy answer. And that's why this story pulls us in. Because it's not just about royalty. It's about the human struggle between loyalty and betrayal, love and manipulation, truth and illusion. As we peel back the layers in the chapters ahead, each revelation will take us deeper into the contradictions, the hidden tactics, and the shocking consequences of this alleged letter. You'll see how Meghan's influence may have stretched far beyond the personal, into the political, the financial, even the global. And you'll understand why Harry may have reached a breaking point where silence was no longer an option. But before we dive into those details, remember this: letters are dangerous. They outlast words spoken in anger. They can be passed from hand to hand, copied, leaked, exposed. And once a letter like this escapes its shadows, it can never be taken back. The monarchy knows it. Meghan knows it. And Harry, perhaps more than anyone, knows it too. So, what exactly did that letter say? And why is it so destructive that Meghan would do anything to keep it buried? We're about to step into the pages, but be warned, what comes next may change the way you see their story forever. What exactly did that letter say? That's the question hanging in the air like smoke after an explosion. And here's where things get uncomfortable, because the first lines of that hidden document didn't read like love, or confession, or even regret. They read like a carefully placed dagger, aimed straight at the heart of the man who thought he was protecting his wife. Imagine Harry's face as his eyes scanned those words, his chest tightening, his pulse quickening, his grip on the paper trembling just enough for the edges to crumple. The letter opened not with pleasantries, not with apologies, but with accusations so sharp they cut through years of loyalty in an instant. Have you ever stumbled across a truth you weren't ready to face? Maybe an email left open, a text message sent to the wrong person, a secret whispered in a room you weren't supposed to enter. That's the gut punch Harry felt. Because this wasn't just any message. It was the kind of revelation that redefined his past, his present, and his future. The words were simple, yet devastating. The letter suggested that Meghan's devotion was not what it appeared to be. Instead, it claimed her affection had strings attached, strings she pulled with precision, ensuring Harry's every step distanced him further from the life he once knew. And here's the contradiction that made Harry's stomach churn. For years, he had believed leaving the monarchy was his choice, his rebellion, his stand for freedom. But in black and white, this letter implied it had all been orchestrated. Let's pause for a moment. Think about manipulation. It doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, a word spoken in just the right tone, a pause that makes you doubt yourself, a reminder of your worst fears. Now imagine those tactics being used not by an enemy, but by the very person you share your life with. How would you even begin to untangle the truth from the lies? Harry's mind must have raced back to the beginning. The whirlwind romance, the fairy tale wedding, the late-night conversations where Meghan assured him she understood his pain in ways no one else ever could. And maybe she did. But what if understanding wasn't compassion, it was strategy? That's what the letter hinted at. That his trauma, his longing for escape, his desperation to protect Meghan from the media, it wasn't just acknowledged. It was leveraged. The first accusation cut deep, that Meghan allegedly convinced Harry his family could never truly support him. Every warning from William, every hesitation from Charles, every awkward silence from courtiers. According to the letter, those weren't just natural tensions. They were fuel. Fuel Meghan allegedly poured onto Harry's doubts until the fire consumed every bridge he had left behind. Can you see it? The irony is brutal. A prince born into one of the most powerful families in the world, manipulated into believing he had no power at all unless he walked away from them. And once he walked, there was no way back. But here's where it gets even darker. The letter didn't just claim manipulation. It detailed it. Specific moments. Carefully orchestrated conversations. Times when Meghan allegedly planted the idea that Harry's family wasn't safe, that they would never protect him, that he was always destined to be the expendable spare. And in Harry's mind, who else understood what it felt like to be discarded, overlooked, unwanted? Diana. The ghost of his mother hung over every word. The letter suggested Meghan knew it and used it. Now I have to ask you directly. What would you do if you discovered that the very grief you carried, the loss that shaped your life, had been turned into a tool to control you? Would you lash out? Would you collapse? Or would you sit in stunned silence, unable to even breathe? That's the storm Harry faced in that study, letter in hand, world collapsing around him. And yet, the more he read, the more he realized this wasn't just about him. It was about everyone he left behind. The letter painted Meghan as the architect of isolation, methodically cutting ties one by one. Old friends who questioned her motives? Gone. Staff who whispered concerns? Dismissed. Family who raised doubts? Branded enemies. It was like watching dominoes fall, except the final piece wasn't the monarchy. It was Harry himself, standing alone, far from everything he once knew. But let's not pretend this was a simple story of villain and victim. That's the contradiction that makes it so gripping. Harry wasn't just manipulated. He was complicit. The letter didn't erase his choices. It amplified them. Because every time Meghan allegedly pulled a string, Harry responded. He made the calls. He cut the ties. He signed the deals. He turned his back. That's what made the words burn so much more. They weren't just exposing Meghan. They were exposing Harry too. And here's the part that will make your skin crawl. The letter hinted at promises. Private vows Meghan allegedly made to keep Harry close. Promises of safety. Promises of loyalty. Promises that the life they were building in California would finally give him the peace he'd been searching for. But peace never came, did it? Instead, scandals followed. Criticism grew louder. And Harry, instead of finding freedom, found himself trapped in a different kind of cage. So why did the letter matter so much? Because it wasn't just an account of manipulation. It was evidence. Evidence that could be shown, shared, leaked. And in the world of royalty and reputation, evidence is everything. Words spoken in interviews can be denied. Rumors can be brushed off. But a written letter? That's a weapon that cuts both ways. Now pause with me here. If you were Meghan and you knew this letter existed, how far would you go to keep it hidden? Would you beg Harry to destroy it? Would you spin another narrative to discredit its source? Or would you double down, knowing that denial is sometimes more powerful than confession? Harry, sitting there with that paper in his hands, had to face an even more painful question. Was he willing to let the truth come out? Even if it meant destroying the person he had sacrificed everything to protect? That's where the room must have felt unbearably heavy. The weight of choice pressing down. The sound of silence louder than any argument. Harry knew he had stumbled onto something he could never unsee, never unlearn, never forget. The letter had spoken. Now it was his move. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever noticed how the smallest details can unravel the biggest secrets? That's what struck Harry next. Because buried within the sentences of that letter were not just sweeping accusations, but little moments, memories, conversations, decisions that suddenly looked different when viewed through this new lens. Think about it. You know how sometimes you replay a conversation in your mind, and it hits you that the words weren't innocent at all, that there was something hidden behind them? That's exactly what Harry experienced. Every whispered argument at Kensington Palace, every sideways glance at a family gathering, every late-night heart-to-heart that felt more like persuasion than partnership. The letter turned those moments into puzzle pieces, and for the first time, Harry could see the picture they created. The claim was simple but devastating. Meghan hadn't just loved Harry. She had allegedly studied him. She knew his wounds, his deepest insecurities, his craving for freedom from the monarchy, his longing to protect her from the press because of what happened to his mother. And she used them, not once, not twice, but systematically, until Harry believed he was making choices that, in reality, had already been chosen for him. Doesn't that idea shake you? That the person closest to you could map out your weaknesses like a battlefield and then use them as weapons? It's manipulation at its most terrifying, because when it's wrapped in love, you never see the attack coming. Now, let's step into Harry's mind at that moment. He must have remembered the warnings. William telling him, "Take your time." Charles hesitating with words unsaid. Courtiers raising their eyebrows, hinting but never daring to speak aloud. He dismissed them all as bias, as coldness, as the monarchy protecting itself. But what if they weren't just being cruel? What if they saw something he couldn't? The letter forced Harry to revisit those conversations. Not as insults, but as alarms he had ignored. And here's the contradiction. Harry always prided himself on being strong, independent, different from the rest of his family. But what if his rebellion wasn't independence at all? What if it was dependence, cleverly disguised? The letter suggested that Harry's choice to leave the monarchy was not a bold strike of freedom, but the outcome of careful conditioning. And if that's true, then his entire identity since 2020, his interviews, his books, his Netflix specials, wasn't really his at all. It was hers. That's a chilling thought, isn't it? To realize that your voice, your choices, your rebellion might never have been yours to begin with. Harry's chest must have tightened as he read the next passage. The letter claimed Meghan pushed him toward exile by isolating him emotionally from everyone he loved. It described her strategy like peeling an onion, one layer at a time, until there was nothing left but Harry and Meghan against the world. First, his friends. Then, the staff who had been loyal for years. And finally, his family, the one linked to his past that, once cut, could never truly be restored. Think about how that isolation works. When you cut off all other voices, the manipulator's voice becomes the only one that matters. And once that happens, reality itself bends to their narrative. Have you seen it in your own life? Someone who drifts away from friends, family, until they're orbiting one person alone? That's the power the letter described. And it left Harry asking the question he had avoided for years. Had he been isolated out of love or out of strategy? The irony makes your skin crawl. Because for years, Meghan and Harry's public image was built on togetherness. They were partners, equals, soulmates who had defied the monarchy to live free. And yet, the letter painted a very different picture, one of imbalance, where Harry's devotion was unconditional, but Meghan's loyalty came with conditions attached. Now, imagine holding that letter in your hands, realizing the story of your marriage might not be the story you thought you were living. Wouldn't you question everything? Harry surely did. Because the examples in that letter weren't vague, they were pointed. Specific events, specific arguments, specific choices. Like the decision to step back from royal duties, framed as mutual, but, according to the letter, seeded long before Harry believed it. Or the interviews that positioned Harry as a victim, when in reality, the letter suggested it was Meghan who orchestrated the narrative behind the camera. The contradiction is unbearable. Because Harry fought the monarchy for love, but the letter forced him to ask, was it love that motivated Meghan, or ambition? Was his sacrifice her salvation, or her strategy? And here's where the emotional beat lands hardest. Harry thought he was protecting Meghan from the same press that destroyed his mother. But what if, in the end, he was protecting Meghan from something else entirely, the truth being revealed? At this point, Harry's mind must have been a storm. Memories colliding with accusations, love battling suspicion, trust eroding with every sentence. But the worst part? The realization that Meghan wasn't just pulling him away from his family. She was pulling him towards something else. A new identity, a new stage, a new life, but one built entirely on her terms. So let me ask you, how do you come back from that? How do you look at the person you sleep beside, the mother of your children, knowing that there might be manipulation at the core of it all? Harry sat in silence, the letter still in his hands, his world crumbling in ways the public could never imagine. And just when he thought the accusations couldn't cut any deeper, the final lines on the page delivered a blow that left him breathless. Because the letter didn't just accuse Meghan of manipulating him. It suggested she had planned his entire exile from the royal family long before he ever realized it. And that's when Harry understood this wasn't just betrayal. This was a strategy. But if Meghan really had been pulling the strings all along, what else was she hiding? What was the end game? And how much of Harry's life had already been scripted without his knowledge? Have you ever had a moment when the ground feels like it's shifting beneath your feet? When the life you thought you were living suddenly feels like a stage play, and you're not the star. It's just the character being directed. That's exactly where Harry found himself as he read the letter's next revelation. Because here's the twist that took his breath away. The exile from the royal family, the decision to pack up, to walk away from duty, wasn't born in crisis. It wasn't a last-minute escape from media pressure. The letter suggested it was planned, premeditated, scripted like an act in a drama where Harry didn't write a single line. Stop and think about that. How many times have we been told the story of Megxit as if it was a desperate reaction? The tabloids showed Harry and Meghan as victims pushed out by a cold palace, a merciless press. But the letter described something entirely different. It painted Meghan not as the wounded party, but as the director, someone who allegedly mapped out Harry's exit strategy before he even realized he wanted to leave. The California dream, the Netflix deals, the Spotify exclusives, the mansion with sweeping views. According to the letter, none of this was spontaneous. It was part of a bigger plan. And Harry? He was the ticket, the royal name that gave the plan legitimacy, the crown jewel that Meghan needed to cement her new life away from the monarchy. Can you imagine the wave of nausea that must have hit Harry as he processed that? For years, he defended the move as his choice, his rebellion against the institution that caged him. But if the letter was right, then it wasn't rebellion at all. It was relocation, carefully executed under the guise of freedom. And here's where the emotional sting cut deepest. The letter claimed Meghan convinced Harry to see his family not just as distant, but as dangerous. She allegedly warned him they would never protect him, never stand by him, never put him before the crown. It was a narrative that played on his deepest wound, the memory of Diana. That his mother died unprotected, hounded by the same institution that should have sheltered her. Meghan allegedly turned that scar into a weapon. Every time Harry doubted, she reminded him of Diana. Every time he hesitated, she painted the palace as the villain. Now ask yourself this. If someone reminded you of your most painful loss every time they wanted you to act, how long before you believed that acting was survival? That's how powerful the grip of manipulation can be. It doesn't just shape your choices. It rewrites your history. And yet, the contradiction here is maddening. Meghan positioned herself as Harry's savior, the one who understood him, the one who stood with him against the world. But if the letter was right, she wasn't just standing with him, she was steering him. And every step he took was one she had already marked on the path. Here's where the irony really burns. Harry thought leaving the monarchy would give him peace, freedom, a chance to breathe. But what did he really get? Endless interviews, constant publicity, deals that kept him tied to the very spotlight he claimed he wanted to escape. The letter suggested that's exactly how Meghan wanted it. That peace was never the goal. Power was. Do you see the trap? Harry traded one cage for another. He left the monarchy, yes, but he didn't find independence. He found dependence. On Meghan. On the empire they were building together. And unlike the royal crown, this new empire wasn't built on centuries of tradition. It was built on him, on his name, his story, his pain. That's the cruelest part of all. Meghan allegedly turned Harry's suffering into currency. The trauma of his past became the brand of his future. And once the world bought into that brand, there was no way back. But the letter didn't stop at pointing out the manipulation. It hinted at promises Meghan allegedly made to keep Harry loyal. Promises that their children would grow up safe. Promises that their love story would prove the monarchy wrong. Promises that together, they would redefine royalty on their own terms. But when Harry compared those promises to reality, the constant criticism, the fractured family, the hollow deals, it all felt like smoke. Promises with no foundation. Now here's the question that kept Harry frozen. If Meghan planned this from the beginning, if she mapped out his escape from the crown before he even realized he wanted it, then what else had she planned? How far did her strategy go? And more importantly, where did it leave him? You can feel the contradiction clawing at him. On one hand, he loved her. He chose her. He stood by her against his family, against the crown, against the press. But on the other hand, the letter forced him to wonder, was it really his choice at all? Or had every choice been hers? The silence in that study must have been unbearable, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Harry sat there, staring at words that ripped apart his reality, and the final lines of that section drove the knife even deeper. Because the letter didn't just say Meghan manipulated Harry into exile. It suggested she never intended for him to return. No reconciliations. No olive branches. No path back to the family he'd left behind. According to the letter, Meghan's plan was permanent. Once Harry stepped out of the palace gates, the door was closed forever. And that realization nearly broke him. Because it meant the man who thought he was protecting his wife might have actually been surrendering his entire world, for good. But if exile was only the first step in Meghan's plan, what was the second? What did she really want from Harry beyond his loyalty, his name, his sacrifice? What was the second step? That was the question burning in Harry's chest, and the letter wasted no time answering it. Because exile wasn't the end game. It was just the beginning. According to the letter, Meghan allegedly wanted something bigger than a royal title, bigger than palace walls, bigger even than the crown itself. She wanted influence, global influence. And Harry? He was the key that unlocked it. Think about it for a second. Without Harry, Meghan was an actress. Talented, yes. Ambitious, absolutely. But her name didn't carry centuries of history. Her story didn't resonate with millions the way Diana's did. Harry's lineage was the golden ticket, and the letter suggested Meghan knew that from the start. Can you see the irony? Harry thought leaving the monarchy stripped him of power. But in reality, his royal bloodline gave Meghan the leverage she needed to reinvent herself on a global stage. Hollywood doors swung open. Corporate deals followed. Political figures leaned in. Why? Because Meghan wasn't just Meghan anymore. She was Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, wife of Diana's son, mother of a new generation of royals. And all of it depended on Harry. Here's the contradiction that stings. Harry believed he was stepping down for love, for family, for freedom. But the letter implied his departure was designed not to reduce his significance, but to repackage it, to turn him from a prince of the crown into a brand of his own. Except he wasn't the one in charge of that brand, Meghan was. And the examples in the letter made it even clearer. It described how Meghan allegedly positioned Harry for interviews, encouraging him to speak not just about his pain, but about his anger, his resentment, his scars. Why? Because pain sells. Pain makes headlines. Pain turns into million-dollar deals when packaged the right way. Now let me ask you, what happens when your wounds aren't just personal anymore, but profitable? Doesn't that change everything? The letter hinted that Meghan understood this dynamic perfectly, that every time Harry revealed another layer of trauma, about Diana, about William, about Charles, it wasn't just catharsis. It was strategy. It was content. And the world ate it up. Netflix streamed it. Spotify monetized it. Book publishers turned it into bestsellers. But at what cost? Harry's identity became his pain. His worth became his wounds. And according to the letter, Meghan allegedly made sure of it. But here's the chilling twist. The letter suggested this wasn't just about money. It was about power. Meghan allegedly knew that the louder Harry spoke, the weaker the monarchy looked. Every interview, every documentary, every confessional detail, all of it chipped away at the royal institution, one revelation at a time. And each chip didn't just diminish the crown, it elevated Meghan. Think about that for a moment. The monarchy thrives on silence, on mystery, on the unspoken rules that keep the institution intact. But Meghan flipped the script. She turned silence into speeches, mystery into memoirs, private pain into public spectacle. And Harry? He was the one holding the microphone. Even if Meghan allegedly wrote the script, doesn't that make you question everything? Was Harry truly telling his story, or was he delivering hers? The letter even went further, suggesting Meghan had long-term goals beyond Hollywood, that she wanted political influence, perhaps even a seat in international conversations where her voice would matter more than any actress's ever could. And how would she get there? By using the royal name, the royal history, and the royal scars that Harry carried like an open wound. Now here's the emotional beat that made Harry's hands shake as he read. The letter implied that once his usefulness faded, once his name, his pain, his story had been fully leveraged. Meghan might no longer need him at all. That was the darkest suggestion. That love might have been less about forever and more about function. Can you imagine the devastation of realizing that? That your marriage, your sacrifice, your children's future might have been part of a grander plan where you were the stepping stone, not the destination? And here's where the contradiction rips you apart. Harry wanted to believe in love. He wanted to believe Meghan chose him. Not the crown, not the name, not the legacy. But the letter forced him to ask, what if it was all three? What if she chose Harry not in spite of his royal blood, but because of it? The weight of that realization must have been unbearable. Because if Meghan's alleged plan was true, then Harry's entire life since the wedding had been one long script. And he wasn't the author, he was the actor. Let me ask you directly. Would you stay in a marriage if you discovered you were more valuable as a symbol than as a partner? Would you keep protecting someone if you suspected they might never have truly loved you for you? That's the torment Harry faced in that study, letter in hand, his entire life unraveling. The exile wasn't the escape he thought it was. It was the opening act of a play Meghan had been directing all along. But if that was the beginning, what role did his children play in the grand design? Because the letter hinted at something even more shocking. Archie and Lilibet weren't just Harry's legacy. They were part of the plan. Children. The very word should bring comfort. Innocence. A promise of the future. But as Harry's eyes moved down the next lines of that letter, the comfort was gone. The words twisted everything he thought he knew about fatherhood, about family, about what it meant to protect his own blood. Because according to the letter, Archie and Lilibet weren't just blessings, they were leverage. Let that sink in for a moment. Imagine discovering that your children, the most precious, untouchable parts of your life, had allegedly been woven into a strategy, a plan designed not only to secure love, but to cement influence. For Harry, that realization must have hit harder than any headline, any royal feud, any family betrayal. Because children aren't pawns. And yet, the letter suggested they were positioned exactly that way. Think about how the narrative played out. Archie's birth, the secrecy, the speculation, the drama. Then Lilibet, named after the queen herself, a move that looked like respect on the surface but sparked controversy behind palace doors. Each child became a headline, each birth a spectacle, and the letter implied this wasn't coincidence, it was calculation. Here's the contradiction that made Harry's stomach twist. He left the monarchy to give his children freedom, to protect them from the relentless spotlight that destroyed his mother. But in California, were they really free? Or were they thrust into a different kind of stage? One where their names, their images, their very existence became part of Meghan's brand. Let me ask you directly. How would you feel if your child's face was worth millions? If their name opened doors, signed deals, drew headlines? Would you feel proud or horrified? The letter suggested Meghan allegedly saw their children not only as family, but as a legacy she could control. That naming Lilibet was no accident, but a deliberate move to tie herself tighter to the royal lineage, whether the palace approved or not. That Archie's introduction to the world wasn't mishandled chaos. It was a test run, a way to see how far she could control the narrative. And here's where the emotional punch lands. For Harry, his children were the line he swore never to cross. He vowed they wouldn't suffer as he did, growing up under scrutiny, haunted by flashbulbs. But if the letter was true, Meghan allegedly crossed that line without hesitation. And Harry, blindly loyal, desperately protective, helped her do it. Isn't that the cruelest irony? That in trying to protect his children, Harry might have unknowingly turned them into tools of the very system he thought he was escaping. The examples hit like body blows. Archie's carefully staged public appearances, Lilibet's christening drama, the constant teasing of photos and stories, each release timed for maximum impact. Were those parenting choices? Or were they pieces of a larger strategy designed to keep Meghan and Harry relevant, visible, profitable? And the letter didn't shy away from the darkest suggestion of all, that Meghan allegedly viewed the children as anchors. That with them, Harry could never walk away. That no matter how doubts gnawed at him, no matter how strained the marriage became, he would always stay. For Archie, for Lilibet, for the family he couldn't bear to break. Do you see how deep that cuts? Love binds. But children? Children chain. And the letter hinted Meghan understood that perfectly. The contradiction is almost unbearable. Harry, the boy who lost his mother to a media circus, now raising children who may have been positioned at the center of one. And the realization must have shattered him. Because if the letter was true, then his sacrifice wasn't just his own, it was theirs too. Now pause for a second. Imagine the weight on Harry's chest as he folded the page back, his eyes burning, his throat dry. The children he thought he saved might already have been caught in something far more dangerous than the monarchy ever was. And that's when the letter delivered its sharpest twist yet. It suggested that Archie and Lilibet weren't just pawns in a family game. They were part of Meghan's plan to solidify her legacy, not Harry's, not the crown's, but hers. Because once children carry royal blood, once they bear royal names, they become history. And Meghan allegedly ensured that history would always carry her mark. Can you imagine the rage building inside Harry at that moment? The heartbreak? The sheer disbelief? Everything he thought he was protecting might already have been lost. But if his children were part of the plan, then what did that mean for Harry himself? What role did he really play? What role did Harry really play? That question echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. Because if his children were anchors, part of the strategy, then what did that make him? The letter didn't sugarcoat it. It laid it out plainly. Harry wasn't just a husband. He wasn't just a father. He was the linchpin, the indispensable piece, the royal bloodline, the name, the image, the tragedy, the rebel, the one figure Meghan needed to unlock everything else. Think about that. Harry, who had always struggled with his identity inside the royal machine, suddenly realized he might have been caught in a different machine altogether. A machine not of crown and duty, but of image and ambition. He had swapped one institution for another, and the terrifying part was, this new one revolved entirely around him. Can you imagine the irony? Harry thought he was escaping being the spare, the expendable royal. Yet, according to the letter, Meghan had turned him into something even more valuable, the centerpiece of her narrative. Every deal, every headline, every tearful interview, they all orbited around him. But not in celebration. In exploitation. Here's where the contradiction bites hardest. In the palace, Harry resented being overshadowed by William. But outside the palace, he was more important than ever, because Meghan allegedly made sure of it. The letter described how she pushed Harry to step into the spotlight, not as a prince, but as a victim of the crown, a victim of his family, a victim of tradition. The louder he cried out, the more sympathy Meghan earned. The more his pain bled, the more her power grew. Doesn't that twist your stomach? To realize that your suffering isn't just shared, it's showcased. And not by accident, but by design. Let's walk through some of the examples the letter hinted at. The infamous Oprah interview. The Netflix documentary. The memoir that peeled back wounds so raw, even loyal supporters cringed. On the surface, these looked like Harry reclaiming his voice. But according to the letter, they were orchestrations. Carefully timed, strategically worded, designed not just to reveal truth, but to fracture ties beyond repair. And Harry, holding that paper in his hands, must have replayed every moment. Oprah's nods, Meghan's tears, his own voice cracking as he accused his family of cruelty. Did he mean those words? Of course. But was he the one who decided to share them with the world? Or had he been nudged, guided, persuaded until there was no line between his truth and Meghan's plan? Here's the chilling reality. The letter suggested Harry's role wasn't to lead, but to bleed, to provide the emotional currency that Meghan could spend. Now let's bring in the emotional punch. Harry always believed his loyalty to Meghan was his strength, that by standing with her, he was defying the same system that destroyed Diana. But what if that loyalty was the very thing being exploited? What if his devotion didn't protect him? It trapped him. Let me ask you directly. How do you live with yourself if you realize your greatest strength, your love, your loyalty, was the weapon used against you? That's the torment Harry sat with. Because the letter didn't just accuse Meghan of manipulation. It forced Harry to confront his own complicity. He wasn't just a victim. He was a participant. Every choice he made, every tie he cut, every word he spoke into a camera lens, it all played into the very plan the letter described. And that realization is more devastating than betrayal. Because betrayal is something done to you. But complicity? That means you helped build your own cage. The silence in that room must have felt suffocating. Harry staring at the paper, his pulse pounding in his ears, asking himself the unthinkable. Was his marriage built on love, or was it built on leverage? And then came the most brutal line of all. The letter claimed that once Harry's role was fulfilled, once his story had been drained, once his name had been fully capitalized, he could be discarded, just like the friends, just like the family, just like the institution he left behind. Do you see how terrifying that is? The man who gave up everything for love might one day find himself with nothing. No crown, no family, no influence, not even the woman he sacrificed it all for. And in that moment, as Harry folded the letter back into his shaking hands, a darker question crept into his mind. If Meghan had planned his exile, orchestrated his image, and leveraged his children, what else might she be capable of planning? What else might she be capable of planning? That question wasn't just a whisper in Harry's mind. It was a thunderclap, because the letter suggested something more chilling than manipulation, more unsettling than exile, more devastating than isolation. It hinted that Meghan's ambitions didn't stop at reshaping Harry's life. They extended further, wider, into places Harry never imagined he'd be used as a tool. Imagine sitting there, realizing that the woman you thought you married for love might have been weaving you into a grand design from the very beginning. The letter described Meghan not just as a partner, but as an architect, drawing blueprints that stretched beyond Hollywood, beyond California, beyond even the monarchy itself. And what did those blueprints look like? According to the claims, they weren't about building a private, quiet life. They were about constructing a platform of influence. A stage where Meghan could command attention not as an actress, not as a duchess, but as a global figure. A voice that could sit alongside presidents, prime ministers, and CEOs. Can you see the pattern? Every step Harry thought was about escape. Stepping down from royal duties, moving to California, signing with Netflix, writing a memoir, fit neatly into this framework. It wasn't escape. It was elevation. But elevation for whom? That's the part that cut deepest. Because Harry, staring at the words, realized it may not have been for him. The contradiction is almost unbearable. Harry left the palace because he believed he was protecting his wife, protecting his family, protecting himself. But what if the letter was right, and he was never the protector? What if he was the product, the engine driving someone else's ascent? Now, let's pause and really picture the emotional toll. Imagine discovering that your pain has been turned into a narrative, your anger into interviews, your grief into a brand. The letter described Meghan as a strategist who allegedly turned Harry's every wound into a stepping stone. Diana's death, his estrangement from William, his resentment of the press. Each was polished, packaged, presented to the world not just as Harry's truth, but as fuel for Meghan's rise. That's not love. That's leverage. And here's the twist that will make your skin crawl. The letter suggested Meghan had her eyes set on a future beyond Hollywood deals and royal gossip. She allegedly wanted political credibility, to step into arenas where her voice could shape policy, influence causes, and position her as more than a duchess. And Harry? He was the gateway. His name, his legacy, his story gave her the legitimacy to enter doors that would otherwise remain closed. Now ask yourself, would you feel proud to be part of that? Or would you feel used? That's the storm tearing through Harry's chest as he read those words. Because every sacrifice he made, leaving the military, leaving the palace, leaving his family, suddenly looked less like choices of love and more like chess moves in a game he never realized he was playing. And here's where the contradiction rips him apart. Meghan positioned herself as his safe harbor, the woman who understood him when no one else did. But if the letter was true, she wasn't his harbor at all. She was the tide pulling him further and further away from shore, until he was too far out to swim back. The letter didn't stop there. It hinted at a future where Harry might become irrelevant, where once his story was exhausted, once his name no longer sparked headlines, Meghan could stand on her own stage, free of him. Can you imagine the chill that must have run down his spine reading that? The thought that he wasn't just manipulated, he was temporary. And that's when the most haunting thought crept in. Had Diana's son, the boy who swore he'd never be controlled again, become the most controlled man in his family's history? Harry put the letter down, but the words burned in his mind like fire. Because if all of this was true, then the life he thought he chose wasn't his at all. It was hers. His rebellion, his exile, his brand, his children, his voice, all of it tied to a plan he never authored. And that raised the darkest question of all. If Meghan was willing to plan his exile, orchestrate his image, and use his children, what line wouldn't she cross? What line wouldn't she cross? That thought echoed like a warning bell in Harry's head as he sat frozen, staring at the paper. Because the letter didn't just expose past actions, it hinted at future ones. It painted Meghan as someone who always thought 3 steps ahead, who never moved without calculating the ripple. If exile was just step 1 and influence step 2, then what was step 3? That's the part that left Harry's pulse hammering in his ears. The letter suggested Meghan's ambitions weren't confined to fame or even political sway. They were about control, total control over the narrative, over Harry, over their shared story. And if that's true, the question isn't just what Meghan has done, but what she's willing to do next. Let's step back for a moment. Control isn't always about force. Sometimes it's about perception. Shaping what people see, hear, and believe until the truth becomes irrelevant. The letter alleged Meghan had mastered this art. Think about it. Every time criticism rose, Meghan countered with a new narrative. When tabloids painted her as cold, she showed tears. When palace staff complained, she framed it as bullying from the firm. When whispers spread about isolation, she presented herself as the misunderstood victim. Over and over, the story bent to her will. Doesn't that sound like power? The kind of power where you don't need to silence your critics. You just make them look cruel for criticizing you. And Harry realized he had been her strongest weapon in this battle. Every time he defended her publicly, he validated her version of events. Every time he cut ties with family, he confirmed her warnings about their betrayal. Every time he spoke his pain, he amplified her platform. His loyalty wasn't just devotion, it was endorsement. Here's the contradiction that gnawed at him. Meghan claimed to love him for who he was. But the letter implied she loved him most for what he represented: a wounded prince, a tragic son, a rebellious royal. Without those qualities, would she have chosen him? Or was it precisely those scars that made him so valuable? Now picture Harry sitting there, his throat tight, his heart racing. The man who once thought he was shaping his destiny realized he may have been shaped all along. And the letter hinted that Meghan's next move would push even further. That she wasn't just interested in dismantling his royal past. She wanted to ensure he could never go back. That's the chilling part. Because once a bridge is burned, you can't cross it again. The letter suggested Meghan had deliberately steered Harry into actions, statements, and revelations that left him with no way to return to his family. Every tell-all interview, every accusation, every book detail wasn't just catharsis. It was sabotage. By the time Harry realized he might want to reconcile, it would already be too late. Do you see the brilliance in that? A man who might one day question his marriage, doubt his choices, even want to return home. He couldn't. Because Meghan allegedly made sure he had burned every possible road back. That's not just control. That's entrapment. And the emotional punch here is brutal. Harry thought he was leaving to find freedom. But what if the freedom he sought was an illusion? What if every move away from the monarchy tied him more tightly to Meghan's plan, until he had nowhere else to go? Let me ask you directly. What would you do if you realized your escape route was actually a trap? Would you fight back? Would you collapse? Or would you double down, pretending it was still freedom, just to avoid facing the truth? Harry sat there, haunted by another thought, the one the letter whispered between the lines. If Meghan could manipulate his choices, his family ties, his public image, and even his children, then what else could she control? His finances? His friendships? His legacy? His very sense of self? And that's where the fear cut deepest. Because once you realize someone may be capable of controlling everything, you start to wonder, what's left that's truly yours? Harry pressed the letter against the desk, his hands trembling, his breath unsteady. The silence of the room was deafening. But inside his mind, the noise was unbearable. Because this wasn't just a revelation. It was a reckoning. And just as he thought he had read the worst of it, his eyes caught the final paragraph. Words so sharp, so calculated, they made his blood run cold. The letter didn't just expose the past. It warned about the future. But what that warning contained would shake Harry to his very core, and no one could have predicted what it said. What was the warning? That final paragraph wasn't long, but it was lethal, because it didn't just talk about the past or the choices already made. It painted a chilling picture of what lay ahead if Harry didn't play his part exactly as expected. The words were simple, almost casual, but the message underneath was unmistakable. Meghan would not allow her empire to collapse. Not for Harry. Not for the monarchy. Not for anyone. Think about that for a moment. A woman who built an entire narrative on survival, resilience, and reinvention, allegedly telling Harry, directly or indirectly, that he had no choice but to continue down the path they were on. That if he wavered, if he stumbled, if he dared to walk away, the consequences would be devastating. And the threat? It wasn't spelled out. That's what made it even more terrifying. Because Harry knew Meghan didn't need to shout to be dangerous. All she needed to do was remind him of the stakes. His children, his reputation, his already burned bridges with the royal family. His entire world rested on the balance of her silence, or her voice. Now ask yourself this. How much power does someone hold over you when you know they could destroy you with a single sentence? That's the weight Harry felt pressing against his chest as he reread that final paragraph. Here's the contradiction that twisted the knife. Meghan had built her brand on vulnerability, on presenting herself as the woman silenced by the crown, the victim of an unforgiving press. But according to the letter, she was anything but powerless. She was the one holding all the cards. And Harry, the man who thought he was shielding her, realized he might be the one in need of protection from her. Doesn't that irony sting? The knight in shining armor discovering that the princess he rescued was actually the one holding the sword. The letter implied that Meghan's control wasn't going to fade, it was going to intensify. That as their empire grew shakier, she would tighten her grip on Harry even more. That every doubt he had, every whisper of reconciliation with his family, every spark of independence, she would stamp out before it ever caught flame. And Harry knew it wasn't an empty claim. He had seen it before. The icy silences, the tears that came at just the right time, the way arguments always ended with him apologizing, even when he wasn't sure what he'd done wrong. Emotional control doesn't need violence. It just needs precision. And Meghan, if the letter was true, wielded that precision like a scalpel. Let me bring this closer to you. Imagine you've already sacrificed your family, your home, your career, your entire identity. Imagine realizing that every sacrifice wasn't a choice, but a demand. And now, faced with a letter like this, you realize the demands aren't over. They've only just begun. What would you do? Would you resist? Or would you obey? Because by now, resistance feels impossible? Harry's head must have been spinning. On one hand, he loved her. He had built his life around her. She was the mother of his children. On the other, the letter made him see the bars of a cage he didn't even know he was in. And the worst part? He wasn't the only one trapped. Archie and Lilibet were inside that cage too. And here's where the emotional punch lands hardest. The letter ended not with love, not with reconciliation, but with certainty. Certainty that Meghan's plan was unstoppable. Certainty that Harry's role was already sealed. Certainty that the future they were building wasn't optional. It was inevitable. Do you see how devastating that is? To realize you no longer control your own story. That the future stretching out before you is not something you chose, but something chosen for you. That every step you take from now on isn't freedom, but obligation. Harry folded the letter, his hands shaking, his stomach churning. The paper was light, but it might as well have weighed 1,000 pounds. Because in those pages, his entire life had been rewritten. His marriage, his children, his exile, his identity, and now, his future. And as he placed the letter back on the desk, a single thought clawed at his mind, relentless and terrifying. If Meghan could manipulate the past and script the future, what chance did he have of ever escaping in the present? What chance did he have of ever escaping? That question gnawed at Harry like a rat at the edges of a rope. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized, maybe escape was never part of the plan. The letter had shown him the past, exposed the present, and hinted at the future. But the true horror was this. It suggested there was no exit. Not for him. Not for Archie. Not for Lilibet. Can you imagine the suffocation of that realization? To look around at your life, your wife, your children, your home, and wonder if all of it is a gilded cage? Harry had traded one monarchy for another. He had escaped Buckingham Palace only to find himself in a mansion in California that felt just as confining, though the bars weren't made of gold and tradition. They were made of loyalty and fear. Now let's pause. Think about how manipulation works at its peak. It's not about screaming. It's not about force. It's about convincing the victim that there is no alternative. That leaving means destruction. That resistance means pain. That silence is survival. The letter suggested that Meghan had mastered this art, that she had created a world where Harry couldn't imagine living without her, even when the thought of staying tore him apart. Here's the contradiction that burns like acid. Harry was raised to believe he was destined for duty, bound by obligation to crown and country. He rebelled to find freedom. And yet, in rebelling, he may have found himself bound by something far more intimate and far more unbreakable. Not the duty of a prince, but the duty of a husband and father whose every move was allegedly scripted by the woman he loved. Do you see how twisted that is? The boy who grew up feeling like the spare now felt even more expendable, even more controlled, even more trapped. And the letter left him with one chilling choice: stay silent and play his part, or break the silence and risk losing everything: his marriage, his children, his reputation, even his safety. Let me ask you directly, what would you choose? Would you walk away, knowing the person you leave behind could turn your own children against you? Would you stay, swallowing the truth until it burns you alive? Or would you gamble, risking it all in the hope that exposing the truth could set you free? Harry sat there, trembling, his mind racing through every possible outcome. If he spoke, Meghan could frame him as unstable, disloyal, even dangerous. She had the charm, the influence, the narrative power. He had what? A tarnished reputation? A fractured family? A story people were already tired of hearing? Who would believe him over her? And yet, silence wasn't safety either. Because the letter made one thing painfully clear: Meghan's plan didn't stop here. It was still unfolding, still tightening its grip. The longer he stayed quiet, the deeper he sank into a future that wasn't his. The emotional punch here is unbearable. Harry wasn't just a husband questioning his marriage. He was a prince questioning his very existence. Every choice he thought was his own now looked like a performance. Every sacrifice he made now looked like a demand. Every moment of love now looked like a leash. And then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, Harry's mind went to his mother, Diana, the woman who fought for her own voice against a system designed to silence her. Had he just repeated her tragedy, but in reverse? She was silenced by the crown. Was he being silenced by his wife? That thought must have broken him, because it meant that the cycle hadn't ended with Diana. It had simply changed shape. Harry pressed his palms against his face, the letter still burning in his mind. His life felt like quicksand, every movement dragging him deeper, every breath harder to take. And just when he thought he couldn't sink any further, the final words of the letter came back to him with terrifying clarity. A warning, a certainty, a promise. Meghan's story would go on, with or without him. And Harry realized with a shiver that if he didn't act soon, he might not have a role in his own life at all. But what choice would he make? Silence or revelation? And what price would the world pay if the truth finally came out? Now let's pause. Think about how manipulation works at its peak. It's not about screaming. It's not about force. It's about convincing the victim that there is no alternative. That leaving means destruction. That resistance means pain. That silence is survival. The letter suggested that Meghan had mastered this art, that she had created a world where Harry couldn't imagine living without her, even when the thought of staying tore him apart. Here's the contradiction that burns like acid. Harry was raised to believe he was destined for duty, bound by obligation to crown and country. He rebelled to find freedom. And yet, in rebelling, he may have found himself bound by something far more intimate and far more unbreakable. Not the duty of a prince, but the duty of a husband and father whose every move was allegedly scripted by the woman he loved. Do you see how twisted that is? The boy who grew up feeling like the spare now felt even more expendable, even more controlled, even more trapped. And the letter left him with one chilling choice: stay silent and play his part, or break the silence and risk losing everything: his marriage, his children, his reputation, even his safety. Let me ask you directly, what would you choose? Would you walk away, knowing the person you leave behind could turn your own children against you? Would you stay, swallowing the truth until it burns you alive? Or would you gamble, risking it all in the hope that exposing the truth could set you free? Harry sat there, trembling, his mind racing through every possible outcome. If he spoke, Meghan could frame him as unstable, disloyal, even dangerous. She had the charm, the influence, the narrative power. He had what? A tarnished reputation? A fractured family? A story people were already tired of hearing? Who would believe him over her? And yet, silence wasn't safety either. Because the letter made one thing painfully clear: Meghan's plan didn't stop here. It was still unfolding, still tightening its grip. The longer he stayed quiet, the deeper he sank into a future that wasn't his. The emotional punch here is unbearable. Harry wasn't just a husband questioning his marriage. He was a prince questioning his very existence. Every choice he thought was his own now looked like a performance. Every sacrifice he made now looked like a demand. Every moment of love now looked like a leash. And then, as if fate wanted to